I never thought that at 73 I would be sitting in an armchair at night, listening to the silence of the old house as if I could distinguish her footsteps in it. 5 years have passed since Winifred left, and I still wake up at night, automatically reaching out to her side of the bed. The emptiness. Always the emptiness. My house in El Dorado, a late 19th century Victorian mansion, is too big for a lonely old man. But I can't bring myself to move. Every corner, every creaky floorboard holds memories of our lives. 47 years of marriage packed into walls, furniture, photographs in heavy frames. From the study window, I can see the wind fluttering the branches of the maple tree we planted with Winnie on our 10th anniversary. It's huge and majestic now, just as she was majestic even in her last days, when the cancer was eating her from the inside out. "Hamish," she used to say, "don't become a grouch when I'm gone. Promise me." I promised. But it's harder to keep that promise than I thought, especially when it comes to Ruby. Ruby Fowler, now Ruby Calvin, is the wife of my only son, Ebner, a petite blonde with cold eyes and a lawyer's sharp tongue. She came into our lives 6 years ago. Winnie was still alive, though already very weak. I remember her whispering to me after first meeting her future daughter-in-law, "Be careful with her, dear. I see calculation in her eyes." My Winnie was always perceptive. At first, I didn't pay much attention to what she said. I put it down to fatigue and illness. But as time went on, I began to notice what she was saying. Ruby wasn't interested in family history. She looked at our photo albums politely but indifferently. But she listened intently when we talked about finances, real estate, or my connections in the state court system. After Winnie's death, my relationship with my sister-in-law became even more strained. At first, it manifested itself in little things: forgotten invitations to family dinners, an accidentally broken porcelain figurine Winnie brought back from Europe, impatient glances at the clock during my stories. Today is Sunday, the day Ebner and Ruby traditionally come over for lunch, a tradition that Winifred started. "The family has to get together at least once a week," she used to say, "or we turn into strangers." I'm checking the roast in the oven. I learned to cook late after my wife died. For the first few months, I ate convenience foods and restaurant food until I realized it was a path to degradation. Took some lessons from the chef of the restaurant where Vinny and I celebrated our anniversaries. Bought cookbooks. I'm doing pretty well now, though I'm nowhere near Winifred's skill. The clock in the living room strikes 3 times. They're late. Again. I set a bottle of red wine on the table. Cabernet Sauvignon, Ebner's favorite. I arrange the plates, white china with a blue border, a wedding gift from my parents. Winifred saved it for special occasions. Now I use it every Sunday. Maybe it's my form of rebellion against her leaving, or maybe it's just a senile whim. The sound of a car pulling up pulls me out of my reverie. A moment later, the doorbell cuts through the silence of the house. I open the door and see Ebner tall, like me in my youth, but with his mother's soft features. Next to him is Ruby, wearing a bright red dress and shoes with heels so high she has to hold onto her husband's hand. "Daddy!" Ebner wraps his arms around me, and I close my eyes for a moment, soaking up the warmth. When he was little, I was often too busy for hugs like this. Now every one of them is a treasure. "Hamish," Ruby nods, making no attempt to move closer for the traditional kiss on the cheek. "Wonderful weather today." "Certainly is for November," I reply, letting them inside. "Lunch is ready. I hope you're hungry." "Actually," Ruby pauses in the hallway, looking at the painting on the wall, the portrait of Winifred painted for our 40th anniversary. "We've already eaten. Had a reunion with friends. Took too long. I'm sorry." I feel a wave of irritation rising inside, but I suppress it. Winnie wouldn't approve. "That's okay. We can reheat the roast later if you're hungry." "Dad, I'm sorry, really." Ebner looks genuinely guilty. Ruby didn't tell him that she invited the Porters over for brunch. Ruby gives her husband a quick look of disapproval. "I told you about it on Wednesday," she said, her voice sweet, but with a faint note of irritation. "You forgot again." "I didn't." Ebner starts but falters. "Maybe you're right. I'm sorry." I watch this exchange of remarks with growing concern. My son, former captain of the varsity debate team, is conceding without a fight. It's happening more and more lately. We make our way into the living room. Ruby heads straight for her usual spot, a chair by the window overlooking the garden. Winifred's chair. I've never told her this, but every time she sits there, something clenches inside me. Now, how was your week? I ask, pouring the wine. Ruby declines, she's driving. Ebner takes the glass with an appreciative nod. Tense, my son replies. This project with the new shopping center is taking up all my time. The investors change their demands every week. Ebner works in the city planning department, dealing with approvals for large construction projects, a job that requires diplomacy and patience, qualities he inherited from his mother. What about you, Ruby? I turn to my sister-in-law, trying to keep the conversation going. Oh, just fine. Her smile doesn't touch her eyes. The firm assigned me the Renfro case. You know, the one all the news channels are talking about? I nod. The case involves a major land dispute between the city and a private developer. Complex, public, and potentially very lucrative for the attorney if he wins. Nah, Kinwi. Congratulations. That's a big case for such a young lawyer. I'm 37, Hamish. Her tone remains polite, but her eyes narrow. Hardly what you'd call young in the professional sense. Of course I'm sorry. When you've been a judge for 40 years, your generation seems inexperienced. I think it's not the generation, but the approach, she parried. Modern jurisprudence requires flexibility and innovation. Some of the old methods are obsolete. I can feel the jab. It's not the first time Ruby has insinuated that my professional views are archaic. Methods may change, I say calmly, but the principles of justice remain the same. At least they should. Speaking of justice, Ebner interjects, clearly trying to change the subject. Did you hear about the Higgins retrial? The one you were on in the late 90s? I nod. Thomas Higgins, convicted of embezzlement, recently filed an appeal based on new evidence. The case was complex with many nuances. I secured a conviction even though some of my colleagues felt the evidence was insufficient. He was always guilty, I say. New evidence won't change that fact. Ruby makes a sound like a stifled chuckle. What? I turn to her. Nothing. She adjusts a crease in her dress. It's just interesting to see that kind of conviction, even though the appeals court has already accepted the case. I've spent more time in the courtroom than you've spent on this earth, Ruby. My voice remains steady, but anger begins to boil inside. Sometimes experience provides clarity beyond the theoretical. Dad, that's not what Ruby meant, Ebner interjected, giving my wife a warning look. It's just that in legal circles, a lot of people think the Higgins case was controversial. A lot of young lawyers, you mean? I take a sip of wine, who haven't seen the evidence or heard the witnesses. Actually, Ruby's voice gets sweeter, which is always a sign of an impending verbal attack. I've been studying transcripts of the trial for a forensic ethics course at the university. Professor Jenkins used the case as an example of an ambiguous judicial decision. I stare at her, feeling my pulse quicken. Jenkins, an odious figure in legal circles, known for his left liberal views and criticism of the traditional judicial system. A man who has never handled a real case, but considers himself an expert on judicial ethics. Professor Jenkins, I say slowly, has never handed down a verdict in his life. It's easy to criticize from a university chair. But it's hard to admit error from a judge's chair? Ruby raises an eyebrow. There is silence. Ebner stares into his glass, clearly uncomfortable. I can see my son changing in my wife's presence, becoming quieter, more insecure, as if afraid of her disapproval. Someday, Ruby, I say at last, you will understand the difference between theoretical justice and real justice. If, of course, your career advances beyond preparing documents and attending preliminary hearings. Her face contorts with anger for a moment, but she quickly regains control. She rises, tugging on her dress. I need to use the ladies' room. Excuse me. As she leaves the room, Ebner sighs. Dad, why are you doing this? Doing what? Provoking her. She's just making a point. I look at my son with bewilderment. She's openly insinuating that I'm an incompetent judge in my own home. That's not what she meant, Ebner shakes his head. Ruby's just straightforward. It's her way of communicating. There's a difference between directness and disrespect, son. And I don't understand why you let her talk to me like that. Ebner averts his gaze, and in that moment I see the boy I raised, insecure, seeking approval. My heart sinks. What would Winnie say about this? She's always understood our son better. Ruby works hard, he says quietly. She's under constant pressure at the firm. Sometimes it affects the way she speaks. That's no excuse. I set my glass down on the table. We all work. We all get tired. But there are certain boundaries of respect that shouldn't be crossed. You're just not trying to understand her. Ebner's voice becomes defensive. Ruby grew up in a different environment. She didn't have the privileges we do. She made it on her own. I stare at Winifred's picture on the mantel. She would have known what to say, how to find the balance between protecting her own dignity and keeping peace in the family. Ebner, I say finally, I'm trying. I really am. But every time Ruby's here, I feel like a defendant in the dock. In my own house, the son is silent, twirling the glass in his hands. Then he looks up. She thinks you don't accept her, that you're always comparing her to mom. It takes me by surprise. I've never compared, not with words, Ebner interrupts, but you look at her like she's taken someone else's place, like she'll never be good enough. I want to object, but that's when Ruby comes back. She's already in her coat, with her bag over her shoulder. Ebner, we gotta go. The porters are expecting us at 5. We just got here, my son objected, but without conviction. I have a headache, Ruby put her hand to her forehead in a theatrical gesture. And we promised Jane we'd be on time. You know how she feels about being late? Ebner hesitates, glancing back and forth between me and his wife. I can see the inner struggle on his face. Finally, he rises. I'm sorry, Dad. We'll stay longer next Sunday, I promise. I nod, not trusting my voice. I walk them to the door. Ruby doesn't even turn around, heading straight for the car. Ebner lingers on the porch. She's a really good person, Dad, he says quietly. You two just can't seem to get along. I hug my son, feeling him tense with surprise. When he was a child, I rarely showed physical affection. I thought it was a sign of weakness. Another mistake I realized too late. Chérie, be happy, son, I say. That's all that matters. As their car rounds the corner, I walk back into the house. I walk past the table set with the roast cooling, past the bottle of wine I barely sipped from. I walk up to Vinnie and I's bedroom and sit on the edge of the bed. On the bedside table is a picture of her, smiling with a bouquet of wildflowers I picked for her on our 40th anniversary. Her gray hair shines in the sunlight, her eyes still bright and alive despite age and illness. You were right about her, Winnie, I say to the pictures. As always, it's starting to get dark outside the window. I look at my phone, wondering if I should call my son, tell him I'm worried about him, that I see him changing around Ruby and not for the better. But I don't. Ebner's a grown man. He's made his choice. And maybe I really don't accept Ruby for who she is. Or maybe it's something else. Maybe she senses something in me, some resentment I don't realize I have, some reason for her coldness that goes deeper than a simple clash of personalities. I fall asleep in my chair, with Winifred's picture in my hands, thinking about how quickly the things we've spent a lifetime building fall apart. How easily the bond between father and son is lost when a man with cold eyes and a lawyer's sharp tongue comes between them. I never thought that at 73 I would be sitting in an armchair at night, listening to the silence of the old house as if I could distinguish her footsteps in it. 5 years have passed since Winifred left, and I still wake up at night, reaching out to her side of the bed. Emptiness. The morning mail always arrives at 10. Jeremiah, the mailman who has worked in our neighborhood for 30 years, is never late, even on days when arthritis twists his knees so that every step is an ordeal. I noticed the letter from Alan Brooks right away. The thick cream envelope with the embossed logo of the law firm of Brooks, Hampton and Associates stood out among the bills and promotional brochures. Alan is a junior partner, but we've known each other since his days as an intern in the DA's office. Opening the envelope, I found an official letter notifying me to appear as a witness in Penelope Quint's probate case. The hearing is scheduled for next Friday at 10 a.m. at the county courthouse. Penelope is a longtime friend of our family, almost the same age as Winifred. They work together on a charity that supports children's hospitals. Penelope died 3 months ago of heart failure. A quiet, intelligent woman, she had dedicated her life to helping others after losing her own child. A girl died of leukemia at the age of 6. I didn't realize there were questions about her will. Alan's letter gave no details, just a dry notice that I was listed as a witness to the deceased's last will, and my presence was required. Brooks asked me to contact him for a preliminary conversation. Putting the letter aside, I finished my coffee and decided to call Alan immediately. I don't like to put things off, especially court-related matters. Alan Brooks's office? A woman's voice answered. Good morning. This is Judge Calvin. I'd like to speak to Mr. Brooks about the Penelope Quint case. Just a moment, Judge Calvin. I'll connect you. As the quiet music played on the receiver, I looked at the picture on the wall. Me, Winifred, and Penelope at the opening of the new wing of the Children's Hospital. Penelope was always in the shadows, preferring to stay behind the scenes at charity events. Judge Calvin! Alan's voice brought me back to reality. Thank you for calling. I assume you got my letter? Yes, I just did. Alan, what is it? As far as I knew, Penelope had no close relatives. This is, a delicate situation, Judge. I'd prefer to discuss the details in person. Could you stop by my office today or tomorrow? There was a wariness in his voice that made me wary. I can come by this afternoon around 2 Otto. Great, I'll be waiting. And, Judge Calvin, you might want to review personal correspondence from Mrs. Quint over the last year, if you have any. This conversation has left an unpleasant residue. Penelope didn't write me letters. We communicated by phone or in person when she came to visit me after Winifred's death. What could have happened to her will? Glancing at my watch, I decided to go up to the attic. Boxes of Winifred's personal belongings were stored there, including her correspondence with Penelope. Perhaps there would be something in those letters that would shed some light on the situation. The stairs to the attic creaked under my footsteps. It had been a long time since I'd been up here, after my wife's death. It was too painful to see the boxes of her belongings, neatly signed in her small, delicate handwriting. Winifred was an organized woman. Throughout our 50 years together, she kept not only important papers, but also seemingly insignificant little things. Theater tickets, menus from restaurants, dried flowers. History is made of details, Hamish, she used to say. I found a box labeled Correspondence PK 2020. Inside were letters, postcards, and notes from Penelope, a chronicle of 30 years of friendship. Rummaging through the envelopes looking for recent letters, I suddenly noticed that next to this box should have been an antique mahogany chest, a wedding gift from my parents. In it, Winifred had kept special things, her silk and lace wedding dress, a veil embroidered with pearls, a few family heirlooms given to her by her mother. The trunk wasn't there. I looked around, checked behind the stacks of boxes, even went down to the storage room on the second floor, thinking I might have moved it there and forgotten it. The chest was gone. My heart began to race. The only people in this house besides me were Ebner and Ruby, and Mrs. Phelps, the housekeeper, but she'd worked for us for 30 years and was devoted to the family. I picked up the phone and dialed my son's number. After 5 beeps, the voicemail went straight to voicemail. Ebner, it's Dad. Call me back as soon as you can. It's important. Then I called Ebner and Ruby's house. Ruby answered the phone. Calvin residence. Her voice sounded tense, as if my call had interrupted something important. Ruby, it's Hamish. Is Ebner home? No, he's at work. He's in an investor meeting. Is it urgent? I hesitated. Asking my sister-in-law directly about the missing trunk didn't seem right. I just wanted to talk to him. He's not answering his cell phone. He turns his cell phone off during important meetings, she said with a patronizing tone. I'll tell him you called. I'll let him know you called. Thank you. When's he coming home? It's hard to say. These meetings sometimes take too long. Something in her tone made me uneasy. Ebner usually finished work at 6 or at the latest. I see. Please ask him to call me when he's free. After talking to Ruby, I felt a growing unease. Winifred's trunk couldn't just disappear. Someone had taken it, and that someone was probably Ruby. But why? The meeting with Alan Brooks was tense. The fact is, Judge Calvin, Alan folded his hands on the table, that Mrs. Quint's niece, Helena Raymond, is contesting the will. She claims that her aunt changed the will under duress. A niece? I was surprised. Penelope never mentioned a niece. That's because they hadn't spoken in the last 20 years. Helena is the daughter of Mrs. Quint's brother. They had quarreled over their parents' inheritance, and Penelope had cut her out of her life. But now Helena has suddenly reappeared and claims to have been close to her aunt in the last months of her life. That's absurd, I shook my head. Kate's Penelope never mentioned reconciling with her niece. That's why your testimony is so important, Judge Calvin. You were in regular contact with Mrs. Quint until the day she died. I nodded, remembering my last conversations with Penelope. She really hadn't mentioned her niece once. I'd be happy to help, Alan. There's something else. Alan looked unsure. Helena had hired a lawyer from Harrington and Morrow. Young but very ambitious. I tensed up. Harrington and Morrow is a large law firm known for its aggressive approach to litigation. Who's handling the case, I asked, already anticipating the answer. Ruby Calvin. My sister-in-law's name rang like a bell. Ruby is representing a man who is contesting his friend Winifred's will and taking my wife's personal effects at the same time? That's a conflict of interest, I finally said. She's my sister-in-law. She knows I was close to Penelope. Technically, it's not a conflict of interest, since you're not a party to the proceedings, Alan said. But yes, it's an ethical issue. I'm surprised she took the case. I'll talk to her, I said, rising. This is unacceptable. On the way home, my thoughts revolved around Ruby and her actions. Now, the disappearance of the trunk made ominous sense. Ebner still hadn't called me back when I got home. I dialed his number again to no avail. Then I called the office. Mr. Calvin wasn't in the office today. He had taken time off for a family emergency. This news took me by surprise. Ebner hadn't mentioned any plans to take the day off, and Ruby said he was at an investor meeting. I decided to go direct. I got in my car and drove to Ebner and Ruby's house, a modern mansion in a new neighborhood that I'd helped them buy with a sizable down payment. As I pulled up to the house, I noticed Ebner's car in the driveway. So he really wasn't at work, and he's not in a meeting. He's home, and Ruby lied to me. I rang the doorbell. Ebner answered in his house clothes, cup of coffee in his hand. Dad, what are you doing here? Mari Horm. You're not answering your phone, I said, entering the house uninvited. And your wife said you were at an investor meeting, and the office says you're taking the day off. Ebner set the cup down on the hall table. I'm taking the day off, yeah. I had some business to take care of. So personal that you couldn't tell me the truth? Or did Ruby decide to lie on her own initiative? Dad, Ebner sighed. What's going on? You look upset. The chest of your mother's things is gone. The one in the attic, with her wedding dress and family heirlooms? Ebner looked away, and that's when I realized he knew. Did you take it? Not me. He shook his head. Ruby did. She wanted to clean the dress, to surprise me. Said she wanted to keep it in perfect condition as a tribute to her mom. The lie was so obvious I didn't even bother to comment on it. Where's the trunk, Ebner? In our guest bedroom. Ruby had her dress dry cleaned. Take me there. Dad, look, he blocked my path. I know this looks weird, but Ruby really wanted to do something nice. She feels like you never accepted her. Ebner, your wife is lying. She's not going to take care of your mother's dress. She's using it. And you. What are you talking about? Ruby took the case of Helena Raymond, Penelope Quint's niece. She's trying to take the inheritance from the foundation Penelope dedicated her life to. Ebner's face changed. Bewilderment changed to shock, then to disbelief. Ruby wouldn't. She would have told me if she'd taken such a case. At that moment, the front door opened, and Ruby walked in with bags from the grocery store. When she saw me, she froze for a moment, then smiled. Too wide, too fake. Hamish, what a surprise. We weren't expecting you. Obviously, I said dryly. That's why you said Ebner was at work, even though he's at home. That's why you took Winifred's trunk of belongings without asking my permission. Ruby set the bags on the floor and straightened up, her smile gone. Ebner told you about the trunk? It was supposed to be a surprise. So wait, what kind of surprise, Ruby? Showing up in court in my dead wife's wedding dress? She turned pale, and I realized I'd hit the mark. What's he talking about? Ebner looked from me to Ruby. Nothing. Ruby took a step toward her husband. Your father's getting paranoid. I just wanted to clean my dress. You did? Then why are you representing Helena Raymond in the case against Penelope Quint's will? Are you handling that case? Ebner turned to his wife. Against Aunt Penelope's foundation? It's just a job. Ruby straightened, her voice harder. A client came to the firm, and Jeffrey assigned the case to me. I couldn't refuse. Yes, you could. I shook my head. You could have declared a conflict of interest. There's no legal conflict of interest, Ruby countered, and I don't have to discuss my business with my family. And the trunk? Ebner took a step toward her. Why did you take Mom's things? I already told you. I wanted to surprise you. Or were you looking for Penelope's letters? Something that could help your client? That's absurd, Ruby crossed her arms over her chest. You're getting paranoid, Hamish. You're seeing conspiracies where there aren't any. Maybe it's an age thing. Ruby! Ebner's voice was sharper than usual. Don't talk to your father like that. She instantly softened her tone, putting her hand on her husband's shoulder. I'm sorry, dear. I'm just defending myself against unfair accusations. Your father literally barges into our house and accuses me of stealing and professional dishonesty. I want to know the truth, Ebner pulled away from her. Did you take the case against Aunt Penelope's will? Yes, her voice sounded confident. It's part of my job, and it's perfectly legal. Shirawarjus, and you didn't tell me. Because I knew you'd react emotionally. Ruby tried to take his hand, but he pulled away. It's just business, Ebner. It's nothing personal. And my mother's dress? He turned to her. Is that business too? Ruby hesitated, and I saw a flicker of confusion in her eyes. I wanted to study it for historical evaluation. The client mentioned that her aunt owned antiques, and I thought I might have a better understanding. Stop, Ebner held up his hand. Just stop. Every word is a lie. I'm taking the trunk, I said firmly, now. And Ebner and I need to talk. Alone. In my own house? Ruby was outraged. I'm not going to let you. It's not your house, I interrupted. The mortgage is in my name. I'm paying for it. And I can cancel those payments at any time. You wouldn't dare, she hissed. Check. I smiled without a shadow of amusement. Now for the trunk. Ruby turned to Ebner, expecting him to stand up for her, but her son remained silent, staring at the floor. All right, she curled her lips. I will fetch your precious chest, but you'll regret it, Hamish. When she left the room, Ebner looked up at me. Papa, I didn't know she took the case. I swear. I believe you, son. I put my hand on his shoulder. But you've got to open your eyes. Ruby's using you. She's using our family. I don't understand why she'd want Mom's dress. He shook his head. What was she going to do with it? I don't know, I answered honestly. But nothing good. Ruby returned, carrying a heavy mahogany chest. She set it on the floor between us like a barrier. Here, her voice shook with restrained rage. Take your treasure, but don't think this is the end. Where's the dress? I asked, opening the chest. Everything was in place. Family jewelry, scrapbooks, letters, everything except Winifred's wedding dress. At the dry cleaners, like I said. Ruby crossed her arms over her chest. Which one? I looked her straight in the eye. Premium Cleaners on Oak Street. She didn't blink an eye. Take him. It'll be ready on Friday, just in time for court. She said the last words almost in a whisper, but I heard her. So I was right. I closed the trunk. You're planning some kind of courtroom spectacle with my wife's dress. That's not true, Ruby swallowed nervously. I misspoke. The dress will be ready by Friday, and the hearing's on the same day. Just a coincidence. Ebner shifted his gaze from her to me, as if watching a tennis match. I don't believe you, I said, picking up the trunk. And Ebner doesn't believe me either. Do you, son? Ebner opened his mouth, then closed it. Ruby turned to him, her eyes narrowed. You're not going to believe that old man, are you? He's getting paranoid. Sees malice in everything. It's dementia, Ebner. You should know that. Don't talk about your father like that. Ebner's voice sounded uncertain. He didn't. Open your eyes, Ruby exclaimed. He's trying to destroy our family because he can't stand the fact that you're living your own life. He wants to control you like he's been controlling you all his life. That's not true, I objected calmly. I just want to protect my son from being manipulated. Manipulation? Ruby laughed an unnatural laugh. Who's manipulative? You've been financially intimidating him his whole life. A mortgage in your name, threats to stop making payments. That's manipulation. I saw her words resonate in my son's eyes. Old resentments I didn't know I had were coming to the surface. Ebner, I looked him straight in the eye. I never used money to control you. The help with the mortgage was just that, help. You're my son, and I love you. And so you accuse his wife of theft and professional dishonesty? Ruby parried. Is that love? Ebner stood between us, clearly torn between the two closest people in his life. Finally, he took a deep breath. Daddy, I think you'd better leave, he said quietly. I need to talk to Ruby. Alone. I felt a pang of disappointment, but nodded. Sure. Call me when you're ready to talk. Ruby smiled triumphantly behind her husband's back, and in that moment I saw my sister-in-law's true face, cold, calculating, cruel. Take the trunk, Ebner said. I'll make sure the dress is returned to you. I promise. Thank you, son. I picked up the trunk and headed for the door. As I walked out, I heard Ruby start to say something fervently to Ebner in a muffled voice. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was persuasive, insistent. The tone of someone who knows how to manipulate others. At home, I put the trunk back where it belonged in the attic. Everything was back, except Winifred's wedding dress. What was Ruby planning to do with it in court? What scene was she preparing to discredit me? And why couldn't Ebner see he was being used? I sat back in my chair, feeling fatigue pile up on my shoulders. At 73, such emotional upheavals don't come easy, but I couldn't give up. For the sake of Winifred's memory, for Penelope's sake, for my son's sake, I had to keep fighting. Even if Ebner now thought his father was becoming paranoid. Friday morning was unusually cold for El Dorado. The town, named after a mythical golden land, greeted me with gray skies and a piercing wind. I was tying my tie carefully in front of the mirror, my fingers unsteady, whether from excitement or age finally taking its toll. The dark blue suit I wore only on special occasions hung heavy on my shoulders, as if it too felt the importance of the day ahead. 3 days had passed since that run-in with Ruby. Ebner hadn't called, though I'd left messages on his answering machine twice. The third time, Ruby picked up the phone and coldly informed me that her husband did not want to talk to me. Her voice oozed fake sympathy as she added, "He's concerned about your condition, Hamish. Perhaps you should see a specialist." The El Dorado County Courthouse stood in the center of town, a stately sandstone structure built in the early 20th century. I had spent most of my professional life in that building, sentencing, settling disputes, and restoring justice. Today, for the first time in a long time, I entered here not as a judge, but as a witness. Alan Brooks was waiting for me in the lobby, clutching his briefcase so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Though young, he was beginning to go bald, and this premature loss of hair added to his seriousness. "Shiri, Judge Calvin," he shook my hand. "It's good to see you in good health." "Alan," I nodded. "How's the mood?" Cautiously optimistic, he lowered his voice. "Judge Hollister's running the trial. He's conservative on inheritance issues. I knew Michael Hollister. He's a serious, methodical man who respects the letter of the law." "Okay," I nodded. "And Helena Raymond, is she here?" Yes," Alan nodded toward a bench against the far wall, where a thin, middle-aged woman sat with a tense face. "Her lawyer, too." I followed his gaze and saw Ruby. She was leaning over some papers, wearing a black suit and her hair in a tight bun. She hadn't noticed me yet. The courtroom doors opened and the bailiff announced the start of the session. We took our seats. I sat in the front row at the plaintiff's table, Helena and Ruby at the defendant's table. Ruby didn't even look in my direction, focused entirely on the papers in front of her. Judge Hollister entered and everyone stood up. Tall, military-looking, he looked around the room and nodded to the bailiff, signaling him to begin. The meeting began with opening statements. Alan Brooks briefly and clearly stated the foundation's position. Penelope Quint, after the death of her own daughter from leukemia, had dedicated her life to helping children with similar diagnoses, and her last will, leaving her entire fortune to the foundation, was well documented. Ruby then took the floor. She rose gracefully like a dancer and turned to the judge. "Your Honor," her voice sounded clear and confident, "my client, Helena Raymond, Penelope Quint's only blood relative, was unjustly disinherited because of a long-standing family quarrel that the late Mrs. Quint refused to forget. In the last months of her life, however, Penelope and Helena reconciled. Mrs. Quint had expressed a desire to change her will, but had not had time to do so before her death. I listened to these lies, feeling anger rising inside. Ruby spoke smoothly, without hesitation, like a person absolutely sure of her words. After the opening remarks, Alan called the first witness, Penelope's family doctor, who confirmed that she had been of sound mind during the last months of her life. The foundation's attorney then called the notary who had probated the will, who testified that Penelope was fully aware of what she was doing and no one had pressured her. Finally, it was my turn. I got up and made my way to the witness stand, feeling Ruby's gaze on me, sharp as a blade. After the oath was administered, Alan began his questioning. Judge Calvin, how long did you know Penelope Quint? More than 40 years, I answered. She was a close friend of my late wife, Winifred. How would you characterize your relationship with Mrs. Quint? We were good friends. After Winifred died 5 years ago, Penelope visited me often. We had lunch together once a month, talked on the phone about once a week. In the last months of Mrs. Quint's life, did she ever mention reconciling with her niece, Helena Raymond? Never, I shook my head. Penelope had only mentioned Helena a few times in all the years we'd known each other, and always with regret for what she'd done with her parents' inheritance. Alan nodded and continued. Did Mrs. Quint talk about her plans for the will? Yes, repeatedly. I met Judge Hollister's eyes, especially after she was diagnosed with heart failure. She was absolutely certain of her decision to leave everything to the foundation. Penelope said it was the only way to give meaning to her daughter's death, to help other children. In the final weeks of Mrs. Quint's life, did you notice any change in her attitude toward the will or toward her niece? None. I spoke to her on the phone 3 days before she died. She was weak physically, but clear of mind. We were discussing the Foundation's new program to support families with children undergoing chemotherapy. Alan nodded and turned to the judge. I have no further questions, Your Honor. Cross-examination? Judge Hollister turned to Ruby. She stood up and walked toward the witness stand with a folder in her hands. Judge Calvin, she began with a polite smile, you state that you knew Penelope Quint well. Yes, I nodded. More than 40 years. And yet you didn't live with her, did you? You couldn't have known about all her contacts and conversations. Of course not. But we talked regularly, and I'm sure a significant event, like reconciling with her niece, she would have mentioned. She might have. Or perhaps she didn't trust you enough to share such personal things. Objection, Alan interjected. Acrocom. Counsel is making assumptions about the nature of the witness's relationship with Mrs. Quint. Sustained, the judge nodded. Miss Calvin, please stick to the facts. Ruby tilted her head slightly, accepting the remark. Judge Calvin, you mentioned that Penelope Quint spoke to you 3 days before she died. On the phone, correct? Yes. She was too weak to visit. That's correct. And when was the last time you saw Mrs. Quint in person? I've been thinking. About 2 weeks before she died. I visited her at her home. 2 weeks, Ruby repeated, as if that were a significant period of time. A lot could have changed in 2 weeks, couldn't it? Objection, Alan intervened again. Request for speculation. Withdrawn, Ruby changed tactics. Judge Calvin, are you aware that Mrs. Quint had memory problems in the last months of her life? No, I shook my head firmly. Her mind was clear to the end. Really? Ruby raised an eyebrow and pulled a piece of paper out of the folder. I have here the report of Dr. Wayne, who made a home visit to Mrs. Quint during the last week of her life. He notes signs of confusion and temporary disorientation. I felt the ground slipping from under my feet. Penelope never mentioned a visit from Dr. Wayne. Who's that? I don't know any Dr. Wayne, I replied. Penelope had been Dr. Benson's patient for over 20 years. Yes, but when her condition worsened, the family called in a specialist. Ruby pointed to Helena. My client made sure her aunt got the best medical care possible. That was an outright lie. I knew Helena hadn't had contact with Penelope in years. Your Honor, Alan interjected, this document was not submitted in advance as evidence. We are requesting time to review it. Judge Hollister nodded. Ms. Calvin, if you want to use Dr. Wayne's opinion, you should have submitted it in advance. Please give a copy to the opposing party and continue your questioning without reference to that document. Ruby pursed her lips slightly but nodded. Judge Calvin, were you aware of the existence of the letter that Mrs. Quint wrote to her niece shortly before her death? No, I answered honestly. Because no such letter exists. You cannot know it. You had no access to Mrs. Quint's private correspondence during the last weeks of her life. Objection, Allen interjected. Again, a request for speculation. Sustained, the judge nodded. Assure me, Miss Calvin, if you have such a letter, introduce it into evidence. I have no further questions for the witness, Ruby said abruptly, and returned to her seat. I felt that something was wrong. Ruby backed away too easily. The judge let me go, and I returned to my seat, keeping my eyes on my sister-in-law. When I sat down, Allen leaned toward me and whispered, "It went well. Judge Hollister is clearly on our side." I nodded, but my inner restlessness wouldn't let go. Ruby leaned over to Helena and said something quietly. She nodded and rose, heading for the courtroom door. "Your Honor," Ruby turned to the judge, "may I ask for a short recess? My client needs to take her medication." Judge Hollister glanced at his watch and nodded. 10 minutes. As Helena walked out, I turned to Allen. "Something's not right here. Ruby's up to something." "Shukram, don't worry," Allen patted my arm. "She's bluffing. They have no real proof." I wanted to object, but at that moment the courtroom doors opened and Helena Raymond walked in. She was followed by a woman in Winifred's wedding dress. I froze, not believing my eyes. The dress, cream silk with handmade lace, pearl buttons across the back, was slightly too big for the woman, but I would have recognized it out of 1,000. It was the dress Winnie had walked down the aisle in 50 years ago. The woman lifted the veil, and I saw Ruby's face. There was complete silence in the hall. Ruby walked slowly to the center of the room, her heels clicking on the marble floor in dead silence. "What's going on?" Judge Hollister finally found his voice. "Miss Calvin, what is the meaning of this?" "I apologize for the unusual appearance, Your Honor," Ruby curtsied. "Suckin, but I have to adjourn because of a serious circumstance involving the opposing witness." She turned to me, and I could see the evil triumph in her eyes. "Judge Calvin is suffering from hallucinations and is haunting me," she announced loudly. "He accused me of stealing this dress, claiming I was planning some kind of spectacle in court. I decided to wear this dress today to demonstrate to the court the instability of his mental state. A witness suffering from paranoid ideation cannot testify reliably. The world swam around me. I could hear Allen's outraged cries, see Judge Hollister banging his gavel for silence, but it all seemed unreal. So, Your Honor," Allen's voice broke through the fog in my head, "this is an outrageous provocation. Ms. Calvin is not only violating every procedural rule, but she's showing extreme disrespect for the court." "I agree," Judge Hollister looked at Ruby with disapproval. "Ms. Calvin, your behavior is unprofessional and unacceptable. I demand that you leave the courtroom immediately and change your clothes." "This court is adjourned for 30 minutes. Ruby nodded, but she didn't look embarrassed. There was a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. She'd accomplished what she wanted, sowed doubts about my adequacy. I sat still as the hall emptied. The picture before me was Winnie on our wedding day, happy and beautiful, and Ruby desecrating that memory. "Judge Calvin," someone touched my shoulder. I looked up and saw an older man. "You remember me? George Fowler. We met at a charity event 10 years ago." I nodded slowly, trying to remember. Fowler. The name reminded me of something. "I'm sorry, Mr. Fowler. This isn't a good time." "I understand," he lowered his voice. "But you should know. Ruby is my niece, the daughter of my brother, Richard Fowler." And then it hit me. Richard Fowler. The land fraud case. I convicted him 20 years ago. 5 years in prison and forfeiture. "She never told you?" George Fowler shook his head. "Ruby blames you for destroying their family. Richard died in prison of a heart attack in his 3rd year of incarceration. She vowed revenge. I felt the blood drain from my face. Everything was falling into place. Ruby's coldness from the first time I'd met her, her marriage to Ebner, her attempts to turn her son against me." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked Fowler. "Because I've seen what hate has done to my niece," he sighed. "She ruined her life, obsessed with revenge. And now she's ruining your son's life. Someone has to stop this cycle of hate." When the hearing resumed, Ruby was already in her usual business suit. She apologized to the judge for the emotional gesture and continued to present her side of the case as if nothing had happened. Judge Hollister did not allow the circus to continue. He sternly thwarted all of Ruby's attempts to hint at my unstable condition and ultimately dismissed Helena Raymond's lawsuit, upholding the validity of Penelope's will. It was a victory, but it left a bitter taste. As I left the courthouse, reporters from the local papers were already waiting. The courtroom scandal involving the former judge was too juicy a story to miss. At home, I went straight to the phone and dialed my bank's number. "Good afternoon. This is Judge Hamish Calvin," I said. "I'd like to speak to Mr. Jenkins about my mortgage loan." Thomas Jenkins was a senior loan officer and an old acquaintance of mine. He picked up the phone almost immediately. "Hamish, can I help you?" "Thomas, remember the mortgage loan I took out on my son's house in the West Hills neighborhood?" "Sure," he said quietly. "Is something wrong?" "I want to suspend the payments. Immediately." Finished with that, I made another call. Richard Tanner, the chairman of the El Dorado Bar Association. Richard and I went to law school together, and although our careers took different paths, we retained our friendship. "Dick, I need your help," I said after a brief hello. "This is about a serious breach of professional ethics." I told him what had happened in court, omitting personal details. Tanner listened in silence, only occasionally interrupting me with clarifications. "Damn it, Hamish," he said finally. "This is serious. Showing up in the courtroom like that, trying to discredit a witness by creating a scene? I'm surprised Judge Hollister didn't give her a contempt citation." "He was too shocked like everyone else," I sighed. "Dick, I know I seem biased since this is my sister-in-law we're talking about, but if any other lawyer had allowed himself to do that—" "You're right," he interrupted. "This deserves a disciplinary proceeding. I'll take your complaint to the ethics committee." 2 weeks passed after the courtroom scandal. 2 weeks of silence, unbroken by anything but the calls of journalists, which I ignored. 2 weeks of solitude filled with memories of Ruby's face in Winifred's wedding dress. I didn't leave the house much. El Dorado is a small town, and the court drama involving me had become a major topic of local gossip. I didn't want to catch prying or sympathetic glances. Richard Tanner kept his word. The Ethics Committee of the Bar Association began its review of Ruby's case with surprising speed for such a structure. Apparently, the shocking circumstances and my reputation in legal circles played a part. The fact that I had canceled the payments on Ebner and Ruby's house, I told no one. It was a private matter between me and them. The house, which technically belonged to me, was my wedding gift to my son. But after Ruby had desecrated Winnie's memory, I could no longer safely pay for the roof over her head. Perhaps it was petty, perhaps unworthy of a man of my age and status. But Ruby had crossed a line that could not be crossed. The days passed slowly. I occupied myself with reading, cleaning, cooking, anything that would take my mind off what had happened. Occasionally, I called Alan Brooks to get news from the El Dorado legal world. He was tactful and didn't go into detail about what was being said about me and Ruby in the corridors of the court, but I could tell from the innuendos that the scandal was high profile. At the beginning of the 3rd week, I got a call from Tanner. "Sequanly, Hamish," his voice sounded strangely restrained. "The committee has made a decision. Ruby Calvin is suspended from practicing until a full investigation is completed." I exhaled. It was to be expected, but still the news was oddly satisfying. For how long? At least 6 months, possibly longer. It all depends on the outcome of the investigation. There's a possibility of license revocation. I didn't feel triumphant, just tired. "Thanks, Dick." "Hamish," Tanner hesitated. Her firm already fired her. "Harrington and Morrow values its reputation. They can't afford to keep a lawyer who caused such a scandal." That was unexpected news. I knew the firm's management was tough on ethics violations, but I didn't think they'd get rid of a promising lawyer so quickly. "And another thing," Tanner continued, "I heard that Ebner got a notice from the bank to suspend his mortgage payments. Did you do that?" "The house is in my name," I said, neither denying nor defending myself. "I have the right to manage my own property." "Of course you do," I could hear the disapproval in Tanner's voice. "But are you sure you want to go down that road? What else can I do?" I felt the irritation rising inside. My sister-in-law showed up in court in my late wife's wedding dress to make me look crazy. She dishonored Winnie's memory. She dishonored my reputation. She tried to take the inheritance from the charity for profit. And I'm supposed to provide for her comfort? I understand how you feel, Tanner's voice softened. But Ebner is your son. He's suffering too. Ebner made his choice. I said it firmer than I really felt. He chose her side. He's between a rock and a hard place, Hamish. Don't judge him harshly. After talking to Tanner, I sat in my chair for a long time, looking out the window at the maple tree Winnie and I had planted. Had I been too harsh? Perhaps. But Ruby's betrayal was unforgivable, and Ebner's acquiescence to her actions was doubly treacherous. I didn't expect my son to show up on my doorstep that evening. When the doorbell rang, I thought it was the reporters again. But there was Ebner on the porch, pale with dark circles under his eyes, wearing a wrinkled shirt. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "May I come in?" he asked hoarsely. I stepped back silently, letting him into the house. He walked into the living room, stopping at the fireplace where Winifred's picture stood. "Why, Papa?" He turned to me and I saw a mixture of pain and anger in his eyes. "Why did you do it?" "Why do what?" I met his gaze calmly. "Stop paying for the house of the man who insulted your mother's memory? Or filed a complaint against a lawyer who behaved unprofessionally and unethically? Ruby lost her job." His voice trailed off into a shout. "We got a notice that we had to pay off the mortgage within 30 days, or the bank would start foreclosure proceedings. You ruined our lives over some petty revenge." Petty revenge? I felt my own anger, which I had been holding back all these days, finally break through. "Your wife stole your mother's wedding dress. She showed up in it in court to embarrass me and derail my close friend's probate case. She tried to make me look crazy. And you think that's a small thing?" Ebner lowered his eyes for a moment, but then raised them again, full of challenge. "She admits what she did was wrong, but you didn't give her a chance to apologize. You went straight into action to destroy her, professionally and financially. And did she give Penelope Quinn a chance?" I shook my head. "Ruby was trying to take the inheritance from the Children's Cancer Foundation, Ebner. The foundation your mother had devoted years of her life to. And for what? For money for her client, who hadn't even spoken to Penelope in the last 20 years. I saw that my words hurt him. Ebner knew about Winifred's work at the foundation, knew how much it meant to her. She was just doing her job, but his voice sounded less confident. A lawyer has to protect his client's interests. There's a line even lawyers don't cross. I stepped closer to my son. But that's not the point, Ebner. The point is that Ruby used you, used our house, used your mother's memory, all for revenge. Revenge? He frowned. What are you talking about? I took a deep breath. This was the moment I'd been dreading, but it was inevitable. Did you meet a man named George Fowler in court? No, Ebner shook his head. Who is he? Uncle Ruby. I looked at my son, trying to catch the slightest reaction. He came to me after the dress scandal, told me something interesting. I paused, gathering my thoughts. The story was heavy, and I didn't want Ebner to find out like this, in the middle of a scandal and mutual accusations. But there was no choice. Ruby's father, Richard Fowler, had been convicted 20 years ago for land fraud in El Dorado. He bribed officials, forged documents, scammed land sales. I was the judge in that trial. Ebner's face changed. He sank slowly into his chair. And you sentenced him? 5 years in prison and forfeiture, I nodded. A fair sentence for the serious crimes he'd committed. Fowler hurt a lot of people, Ebner. Families who lost money invested in his schemes. But Ruby never, Ebner stammered. She never mentioned that her father was in prison. She said her parents died in a car accident when she was 15. I felt a prick of regret. How many more lies had she fed my son? Her mother did die in the accident, I said quietly, but her father died in prison of a heart attack in his 3rd year of incarceration. Ruby was 17. George Fowler said she vowed to avenge her father's death on me. She blames me for their family losing everything. Ebner sat motionless, staring at one point. I could see the mosaic forming in his mind, all the oddities in Ruby's behavior, her sudden coldness after meeting me, her insistence on keeping him away from his family. Do you think, he looked up at me with eyes full of distrust, do you think she married me because of you? To get revenge? I didn't want to say it out loud, but I nodded. Ebner jumped up, his face contorted with anger. No, he practically shouted. You're wrong. Ruby loves me. Yes, she has faults. Yes, she made a terrible mistake with her mother's dress. But she couldn't. She couldn't pretend all these years. Ebner, I tried to put my hand on his shoulder, but he recoiled. I'm not saying she doesn't have feelings for you. She may have grown really attached to you over time. But her original motive— No, he interrupted me again. You just can't accept that I love anyone but you and Mom. You were always criticizing Ruby, always looking for faults in her. That's not true, I tried to stay calm, though I was seething inside. I took her into the family. I helped you with the house. I tried to build a relationship despite her coldness. And now you're trying to take this house away. Ebner clenched his fists. You're trying to ruin our lives because of your delusional suspicions. Suspicions? I raised my voice. She showed up in court in your mother's dress. She tried to make me look crazy. And you have the nerve to call my concerns delusional? We stood across from each other, the two Calvins, separated not only by years, but by understanding. I could see the struggle in my son's eyes between his love for his wife and the realization that I might be right. Ask her, I said quietly. Ask Ruby about her father, about Richard Fowler. Look her in the eyes when she answers, and you'll know if I'm lying. Ebner shook his head as if trying to shake off my words. Even if you're right about her father, that doesn't mean she married me out of revenge. People don't base their lives on that kind of thing, Dad. It's only in cheap romance novels. I wish you were right, I sighed. But why else would she want Winifred's dress? Why make that spectacle of herself in court? She was under duress. Ebner didn't sound so sure anymore. The case was complicated, the client demanding. She made a mistake. Mistake? I shook my head. A mistake is when you forget an important document or phrase a question incorrectly. What Ruby did was an elaborate, malicious action. She took the dress on purpose. She planned this performance. Ebner was silent, and I could see the doubt creeping into his eyes. But then he seemed to shake them off and straightened up. You know what, Dad? His voice sounded cold. I don't believe you. You've always been a manipulator, always trying to control my life. But this time you've gone too far. I won't let you ruin my marriage over some old grudges and suspicions. Those words hit me harder than I expected. Manipulator? Me? A man who has always strived for justice and fairness? Ebner, I tried to keep my voice calm. I never lied to you. I never manipulated you. Everything I did was out of love. Love, he laughed bitterly. That's not love, Daddy. It's control. It's always been control. You controlled Mom, you controlled me, and now you're trying to control my wife. And when she wouldn't comply, you decided to destroy her. I looked at my son, and I didn't recognize him. Was this really how he saw our life? Did he see my attempts to guide him, to protect him, to support him as control? Ebner. I took a step toward him, but he backed away. I will never— Stop it! He held up his hand, stopping me. I don't want to hear any more. You made your choice when you decided to ruin our lives. Now Ruby and I will make ours. What does that mean? I felt a chill of fear. It means you're no longer a part of my life. His voice was shaky, but there was determination in it. Take your house. Take your money. Take your accusations and suspicions. But you've lost me. With those words, he turned and headed for the door. I wanted to stop him, to say something that would change his mind, but the words stuck in my throat. I stood there paralyzed until the door slammed shut behind him with a final clang, like a seal on our breakup. Left alone, I slowly lowered myself into the chair. Dusk was settling in outside the window, and the house, already too big for a lonely old man, now seemed like a vast wasteland. I looked at Winifred's picture on the mantelpiece. She was smiling that special smile of hers that always said, "Everything will be all right, Hamish." But I couldn't believe it now. My son was gone, possibly forever. And the worst part was that he left thinking I was a tyrant and a manipulator, a man who would ruin his own child's life out of vindictiveness. How did we get to this point? When did a father-son relationship that was once warm and trusting become a battlefield? Maybe Ebner is right, and I really have been too controlling of his life? Or was it Ruby, all these years slowly poisoning his mind, turning him against me? I didn't know the answers to those questions. All I knew was that I had lost my son, and that Winifred's dress, the symbol of the happiest day of our lives, was now the symbol of the destruction of our family. The house was quiet, with only the ticking of the old clock to remind me of the passage of time. I sat still, feeling the years weighing down on my shoulders. At 73, I was all alone, with a burden of memories and a broken heart. But somewhere deep inside, there was hope that Ebner would come to his senses, that he would ask Ruby about her father, that he would see the truth behind the beautiful facade of their marriage, and then maybe all might not be lost. If only Winnie were here. She always knew how to find the right words, to soften sharp edges, to heal wounds with words and love. But she wasn't. I had to deal with this pain on my own. I got up and went to the window. It was starting to rain outside, the drops drumming on the glass like little fists demanding to be let in. Somewhere out there, in the rainy night, was my son, angry, hurt, perhaps already questioning his decision. And beside him was the woman who had used him as an instrument of revenge, a woman who had desecrated his mother's memory for her own ends. I hoped that one day he would see the truth. Until then, all I could do was wait and remember the words Winnie often repeated in difficult times. The truth will always find its way to the light, Hamish. Always. After Ebner left, life seemed to stand still. The silence in the house became not just an absence of sound, but a physically tangible presence. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, not turning on the TV, not turning on the radio. The silence was my punishment and my refuge at the same time. 73 is not a good age to be alone. As a young man, I had never been afraid of being alone, even found some pleasure in it. After a long day in court, filled with people, their problems, their emotions, the silence of the office seemed like a blessing. But then I knew that I would return home in the evening, where Winifred, with her soft smile and quiet strength, would be waiting for me. Now the silence was different. It was a reminder of losses, of decisions, of the price I had paid for my pride and principles. I didn't regret what I'd done. Ruby deserved the consequences of her actions. She hadn't just deceived her son. She hadn't just insulted me. She had desecrated Winifred's memory by using her wedding dress in her petty revenge. Such a thing could not be forgiven or forgotten. And yet, looking at the pictures of Ebner on the mantelpiece, I felt a prick of regret. Not for my actions, but for the fact that my son had been dragged into this sordid affair. That he, blinded by love or what he thought was love, had not seen the true nature of the woman he had married. Days followed days, and I created a new routine for myself. Morning walks in the garden, especially in the part where Winifred had planted her favorite roses. Reading, mostly historical monographs and biographies, nothing too emotional. Cooking, simple but wholesome dinners for one person. Evenings by the fireplace with a nice glass of brandy. I stopped taking calls. Most of them were from journalists, eager to continue the scandalous story about the former judge and his daughter-in-law in a wedding dress. But sometimes old friends and colleagues called too, expressing sympathy or just checking in to see how I was doing. I didn't want conversation. I didn't want sympathy. I just wanted silence and time to think about what had happened. On one such day, about a month after the breakup with Ebner, during my morning walk in the garden, I heard the sound of a car pulling up. Not the usual sound of a mailman or delivery man. It was the quiet, subdued murmur of an expensive car. I took my time at the gate. If it was a journalist again, I'd better let him know I wasn't going to open it. But a minute later, the gate creaked open, and a tall man in an immaculate gray suit appeared on the path. It took me a few seconds to recognize him as Daniel Porter, my former colleague on the state Supreme Court, who had retired 3 years before me. Hamish, he held out his hand to shake. His palm was dry and warm, as it always was. I'm sorry to call you unannounced. I called, but you didn't answer. Daniel, I nodded, shaking his hand. I didn't expect to see you. You look, he hesitated, searching for a word. So old? I grinned. That's what a man my age should look like. I was going to say tired, he smiled. But if you insist on old, I won't argue. Daniel Porter always knew how to diffuse tension. It made him a great judge. He could calm the most nervous witnesses, get the most aggressive lawyers to tone it down. He was loved by the jury and respected even by those he convicted. You want to come in? I nodded toward the house. I could offer coffee. I'd love to. He followed me down the garden path. You have beautiful roses. Winifred would be proud. The mention of Winnie didn't cause the usual pain. It sounded natural coming from Daniel. He'd known us both for years, been to our wedding, baptized Ebner. If anyone had the right to talk about Winifred without regard for my feelings, it was him. In the house, I ushered my guest into the living room, then went to the kitchen to brew coffee. When I returned with the tray, I found Daniel looking at the pictures on the mantelpiece. Ebner looks a lot like you when you were young, he remarked, pointing to a picture of my son in his graduation robe. Same eyes, same chin line. Chic term. But the mother's personality, I set the tray on the table. Soft. Trusting. Too trusting. Daniel accepted the cup I held out to him. Maybe. We sat down in the chairs by the fireplace. It was starting to rain outside the window. A light drizzle, typical of El Dorado this time of year. How are you, Hamish? Daniel sipped his coffee and looked at me over the cup. And don't answer. Fine. I've known you too long. I sighed. Daniel was probably the only person I could be honest with. He wouldn't judge. He wouldn't give unsolicited advice. He wouldn't try to fix the situation. I'm as okay as I can be, I finally said. Ebner broke off the relationship with me. He thinks I ruined his life out of revenge, that I've always been a controlling tyrant instead of a loving father. And what do you think about that? I think his wife poisoned his mind. I set the cup on the table. She used him from the beginning, Danielle. I didn't see the whole picture before, but now Ruby is the daughter of a man I sent to prison 20 years ago. Richard Fowler, do you remember him? Daniel frowned, remembering. The land scams in the suburbs? He died in prison, if I'm not mistaken. That's right. And his daughter decided to get revenge by marrying my son, slowly turning him against me. And it culminated in that spectacle in court with Winnie's wedding dress. Daniel was quiet for a moment, thinking about what I said. That's a serious accusation, Hamish. But a plausible one, I stepped forward. Ruby had never been sincere with me. I'd sensed falseness in her from the beginning, but I'd written it off as the usual tension between son-in-law and daughter-in-law. Now all the pieces are falling into place. And Ebner doesn't believe you? He thinks I just don't want to see him happy with anyone but me and Winnie. I grinned bitterly. That I control his life, and when I can't control it, I try to ruin it. Daniel finished his coffee and set the cup on the table. His face grew serious. Hamish, I'm here for a reason. There's something you need to know. Something in his tone made me wary. What was it? Michael Renfro approached me. Daniel looked me straight in the eye. You know, he's the head of the Incompetent Citizens Unit in the DA's office now. I nodded. Michael was a capable lawyer, albeit a bit ambitious. A woman came to him with a complaint, Daniel continued. She claims that her father-in-law suffers from senile dementia, stalks her, has paranoid ideas. She wants to initiate the process of declaring him incompetent. It took a second to realize what he meant. Ruby, I said quietly. She wants to declare me incompetent. Daniel nodded. Michael didn't know all the details of your story. He remembers you as a judge, and he was surprised to see such a statement. So he called me to get my opinion. I told him about the scandal in court, about the dress, about your actions afterward. And what did he think? He's leaning towards rejecting the application. Daniel smiled slightly. But he needs to follow procedure. There will be a preliminary investigation. Maybe you'll be called in for an interview. If all goes well, the case will be closed before trial. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a wave of anger rising inside. Incapacity? Ruby had really decided to go that far? She won't stop, I said, more to myself than to Daniel. First the dress, now this. What's next? Poisoning? An accident on the stairs? I don't think it's that dramatic, Daniel shook his head. But she's obviously serious. And Hamish, in a way, you've given her an excuse. A reason? I straightened up sharply. You think I should have just swallowed what she did? No. He held up his hand in a calming gesture. But canceling the house payments, complaining to the ethics committee, you hit her with everything you had, and she's hitting back. That's not the same thing. I was outraged. I was acting within the law. I was protecting Winifred's memory and my own dignity. And she's trying to incapacitate me on the basis of false accusations. I'm on your side, Hamish. Daniel's voice remained calm. I just want you to realize that your actions have consequences. And Ruby isn't the kind of man who gives up after the first defeat. I stood up and walked to the window. The rain intensified, drumming against the glass with a persistence that reminded me of the inevitability of time. My thoughts were jumbled. Ruby had really gone too far. It was one thing to make a scene in court, and quite another to try to legally deprive me of the right to control my own life. What am I supposed to do? I asked without turning around. For starters, don't panic. Daniel stood up too. I talked to Michael. He understands the situation. But you should find a good lawyer who specializes in these cases. Just in case. I was a judge myself for 40 years, I turned to him. Do I really need help with such an obviously absurd case? Precisely because you've been a judge, you should understand the importance of a proper legal defense. He put his hand on my shoulder. No one is immune to unfair accusations, Hamish. Even people with impeccable reputations. I knew he was right. How many times had I seen people in my courtroom whose lives had been ruined by unfounded accusations? How many times have I told defendants about the importance of a good defense? And now I find myself under attack. I'm going to call Elizabeth Hargrove, I said after a pause. She specializes in family law and incapacity cases. Good choice, Daniel nodded. Elizabeth is smart and not afraid of complicated cases. He looked at his watch. I have to go. Promised Martha I'd be back for lunch. Martha was his wife of almost 50 years. Keep me posted, okay? And keep the phone on. The people who care about you need to know you're okay. I walked him to the door. Before he left, Daniel turned around. You know, Hamish, revenge is rarely the satisfaction you expect it to be. It usually only breeds new revenge, an endless cycle. It's not revenge, John, I objected. It's justice. Perhaps, he smiled slightly, but at our age you have to wonder whether it's more important to be right or to be happy. He walked away, leaving me standing in the doorway, feeling as if I'd been taken by surprise. I went back into the living room and sat in a chair looking at the pictures. Winifred in the garden carrying a basket of freshly cut roses. Ebner at his college graduation. The three of us on a picnic by the lake, one of the last family photos before Winnie's illness. Was I happy now? No. Was I right? Absolutely. Ruby deserved everything she got. Her attempt to declare me incompetent was just further proof of her pettiness and spite. But the price was high. I lost my son, perhaps forever. And while I didn't regret my actions, the regret of the consequences weighed heavily on my heart. I went to the phone and dialed Elizabeth Hargrove's number. After a brief exchange of greetings, I outlined the situation. Elizabeth listened in silence, occasionally asking clarifying questions. It sounds like obvious revenge on her part, she said when I was done, but we need to be prepared for anything. Claims of incapacity can be very damaging, even if they are ultimately dismissed. They leave a stain on reputations. What should I do? For starters, gather all medical records for the last year. Her voice sounded businesslike crisp. Records of regular checkups, test results, anything that can prove you're in good physical and mental health. Then make a list of witnesses who can attest to your capacity, she paused, preferably people who are not related to you. That's not a problem, I said. Most of my friends are lawyers or judges. That's fine. And Judge Calvin, try not to make any more accusations. No confrontations with your daughter-in-law or son. No sudden moves with your finances or property. Any action you take now will be viewed through the prism of this statement. After talking to Elizabeth, I felt both more confident and more anxious at the same time. On the one hand, I had the support of a competent attorney. On the other, the very fact that I needed a lawyer to defend me against absurd allegations was deeply offensive. In the evening, I sat by the fireplace going through old photo albums. Here's Winifred and me on our wedding day. She's in the very dress Ruby used for her disgusting performance. Here's little Ebner taking his first steps, holding on to my fingers. Here's Winnie and I celebrating our silver wedding, surrounded by friends. The life captured in these photos now seemed like a distant dream. Reality was here. A lonely old man in an empty house, rejected by his son, hounded by his daughter-in-law, forced to defend himself against false accusations. I didn't regret what I'd done. Ruby deserved the consequences of her actions. She had desecrated Winifred's memory, and for that there could be no forgiveness. But the price I paid, the price was high. Too high. I closed the album and walked to the window. The rain had stopped, and stars could be seen in the breaks in the clouds. Somewhere out there, under those same stars, was my son. Perhaps he too was looking up into the sky. Perhaps he too was thinking about me, about our fight, about words that can't be taken back. The thought that Ebner might have believed Ruby that I was suffering from senile dementia was unbearable. Could he really think that his father, a man who had been guided by reason and fairness all his life, had suddenly lost his mind? Or was it Ruby's idea that he simply couldn't or wouldn't stop? Whatever the answers to those questions, I knew one thing. I would not give up without a fight. If Ruby wanted a war, she'd get one. I had friends in the El Dorado legal world. I had connections. I had a reputation. And I had the truth on my side. In the end, it's the truth that always wins. At least that's what life in the courtroom had taught me. Although, of course, sometimes it takes time for it to win. I walked away from the window and back to the fireplace. The fire was almost out, leaving smoldering embers. Like my life, once a bright flame, now barely smoldering memories. But even in those embers, there was still heat. And I knew that all it would take to rekindle the fire was determination and the right fuel. The morning was clear and cold, the first truly cold day of fall. I stood at the living room window with a cup of tea, watching the wind tear the last leaves from the maple tree that Winifred and I had planted years ago. Strangely, it was in these moments of solitude that I felt her presence most keenly. It had been 2 weeks since Daniel Porter's visit, 2 weeks filled with preparation for a possible competency hearing. Elizabeth Hargrove, my attorney, was confident the case would never go to trial, but insisted on thorough preparation. I gathered all the necessary documents and followed all of Elizabeth's advice. No contact with Ebner and Ruby, no major financial transactions, and regular contact with friends and neighbors so they could observe my full capacity. I had planned to drive to the bank that morning to discuss some investments when I heard the doorbell ring. Opening the door, I froze in surprise. On the porch stood Ruby, in a strict dark gray suit with neatly styled hair. "Good morning, Hamish," she said in that peculiar tone that people use when they're trying to be polite, but really feel the opposite. "May I come in? We need to talk." I led her into the living room, being polite. "To what do I owe the visit?" Ruby didn't beat around the bush. "Hamish, this war between us has gone too far." She folded her hands in her lap. "We've both done things we may regret. I've come to offer a compromise. I'm willing to withdraw the petition to declare you incompetent," she said, looking me straight in the eye. "In exchange for 2 things, reinstatement of our house payments and a letter to the Bar Association asking them to reconsider my suspension." "Does Ebner know about your visit?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Ebner is emotionally unstable. I thought it would be better to work things out between us adults and then tell him the good news." "I mean, no," I nodded. "He doesn't know. Look, Hamish, I'm offering you a reasonable way out of a situation that's hurting us all. Isn't that what's important?" "What about Winifred's wedding dress?" I asked quietly. "Subsequent, what about my wife's memory, which you desecrated with your performance in court?" "I admit it was a mistake," she said at last. "I acted impulsively, under the pressure of circumstances." "We all make mistakes, Hamish." "Impulsively?" I couldn't hold back a bitter laugh. "You took the dress from my house on purpose. You planned your court appearance. It's not an impulse, Ruby. It's a deliberate act." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the maple trees in the yard. "You know what the saddest thing is, Ruby?" I said without turning around. "The fact that you used my son as an instrument of revenge." "What?" She sounded surprised. "What are you talking about?" "I know who you are, Ruby Fowler. I know about your father, Richard. I know he died in prison, serving time on my sentence. And I know you blame me for the destruction of your family. Her face went pale. Her eyes widened. Who told you? Her voice sounded hoarse. Your uncle, George Fowler. The very day in court when you made your spectacle. George was always a weakling, she said through gritted teeth. Never understood what family loyalty meant. So it's true? I took a step toward her. You married Ebner to get back at me? She was silent, and in that silence I heard the answer clearer than any words. Did you do the job? Her voice suddenly grew louder. You destroyed my family. My father was a good man who made one mistake. He didn't deserve to die in prison. Your father was a crook who cheated dozens of people. I remained calm. He received a fair sentence for his crimes. You could have shown leniency. Her face contorted. Probation, house arrest. You knew of his heart condition. I want you to leave, came Ebner's voice suddenly from the doorway. Out of this house, out of my life. We both turned around. Standing in the doorway was my son, pale with circles under his eyes. Ebner! Ruby jumped up. What are you doing here? I followed you. His voice sounded strangely calm. I've heard enough. About your father, about revenge, about lies. All this time. You've been using me? No! Ruby rushed to him. I mean, yes, maybe in the beginning. But then I really fell in love with you, Ebner. Everything between us is real. He stepped back, avoiding her touch. Real? His voice trembled. How can I believe a word you say now? You lied about your past, about your family, about your motives. You used my mother's wedding dress to humiliate my father. You tried to incapacitate him. What's the real story, Ruby? I can explain. Ruby's voice sounded desperate. Give me a chance to explain. I want you to leave, Ebner repeated. I'll send your things, or you can pick them up when I'm not home. But right now, go. Ruby slowly lowered her arms, nodded, and headed for the door. I do love you, she said quietly, and I'm sorry for everything. With those words, she walked out. We heard the sound of a car driving away. When the sound of the engine died down, Ebner sank into a chair, covering his face with his hands. I'm such an idiot, his voice sounded muffled. All this time, she was using me, and I've been protecting her. I trusted her, turned my back on you for her. I went over and put my hand on his shoulder. You're not an idiot, son. You loved her and you trusted her. There's no shame in that. He lifted his head, and I saw tears in his eyes. I accused you of control and manipulation, and all the while I was a puppet in her hands. You couldn't have known. I sat down next to him. Ruby is persuasive. There's a reason she became a successful lawyer. So what now? What am I gonna do? My whole life has been built on lies. No, I shook my head firmly. Warren, your life is your work that you love, your friends, your hobbies, your family. I am your family, Ebner, and I'll always be here for you, no matter what happens. I've been unfair to you, he said quietly. Everything you did was out of love, and I accused you of being controlling, of being vindictive. I'm sorry, Dad. You have nothing to apologize for. I squeezed his shoulder. You trusted the woman you loved. It's natural. Son, but I should have believed you too, he shook his head. I should have at least listened, given you a chance to explain yourself. Instead, I just walked away, cutting all ties. We both made mistakes, I said softly. I haven't always done the right thing either. We can discuss this when we're ready. Can I stay here for a while? Ebner asked. I can't go back to that house. Not right now. Sure. I felt something inside me relax. Your room is always waiting for you. 2 weeks later, we learned that Ruby had left El Dorado. She withdrew her declaration of my incapacity and left for parts unknown. Rumor had it, California, where she had some acquaintances. Ebner stayed at my house. At first he said it was temporary, but as the days added up into weeks, I could see him gradually finding peace under my roof. One evening, as we sat by the fireplace, Ebner said, You know, I think Mom would be happy to see us together, in spite of everything that's happened. I looked at the portrait of Winifred over the fireplace. She was smiling that special smile of hers that always spoke more than any words. Yes, I agreed. She had always believed that truth and love triumphed in the end. In the silence of the living room, filled with the crackling of logs in the fireplace, I felt Winifred's presence more strongly than ever. She would be pleased. Despite the pain and betrayal, we were family again.